We just have the M Plus being released, and of course we had to do a tier list because of course, but it is just the first 3 days and people are popping off in M Plus this week, and I'm happy to see it because I didn't think it was gonna happen. But what melee spec is performing the best right now? Which one sucks in the first 3 days of the M Plus scene? So let's check it out. And we're gonna start off with Arms Warrior because it's the first one in alphabetical order, and as it stands, it goes straight into B tier. I kind of hoped there would be a F tier to shove arms in, but actually it's doing quite a bit of damage. It's not that amazing. As it stands right now, arms is clearing 8s and 9s overall. We'll top some of the top arms, and you're going to see throughout this video some breakdowns of the top 10 spec representatives, since there's not a lot of data to go on right about now, and we're not going to look at Warcraft logs because that is skewed in all the wrong places. And obviously this is just the first couple of days. I do have to say this because I know people are going to comment, so this will end up changing for sure. But what we want to know is, like, how is the first week or the first few days of meta showing for everybody when it comes to, you know, where their spec is. And arms is in B tier because mostly being carried by Jellyfish, I think. When it comes to all of the high keys, they are still lagging a little bit behind some of the top melee DPSers. And if you want to know the meta of programming, you can start with today's sponsor, boot.dev, which is a banger platform to get you started on learning backend web development with Python and Go as programming languages. And that's all fine and dandy, but learning can be boring sometimes, or always, which makes the boot.dev guys actually brilliant for how they created their process, since it's made for gamers like you and me. As part of a learning process, you embark on a quest and gain experience points, achievements, level up, fight in boss battles, and so on. Since the best way to learn is by never getting bored. And coding in an RPG-like fashion is hilarious and also very engaging. And once you get started, you get going, since it's so easy to go from lesson to lesson writing code upon code. The boot.dev team designed the platform to get you on that coding grind and write a lot of code, because just like getting better at Mythic Plus in WoW, the only way to learn and improve is by getting your hands on that keyboard and write a lot of code. Ship a lot of projects, get stuff done, you know? Sometimes lessons can be hard, and I stumbled on some stuff. The solution option in the platform explains what needs to be fixed. Sure, you lose the XP points, but you still learn and don't have to start Googling stuff or calling your teachers. Not to mention, if you actually really do struggle, you can get Boots, the powerful bear wizard, which can walk you through your lesson. And you can start your journey by clicking the link in the description and use our code Marcelian online to get 25% off of your first payment, which can be a month subscription or a yearly one. And hey, you have a 30-day no questions asked refund policy you can call on if this isn't for you. Like, for real, getting into learning backend web development has never been so quick and easy than now with boot.dev, and cheers guys for sponsoring our video. And now Assassination has been a very happy surprise. Also, I do want to say that most of the specs that will go starting from A tier, where Assassination is going to land up in, although it's S tier, they're all clearing 11s as of this moment. Now, not all of them are in time, so not all of those 11s give the most amount of score, but probably by the end of this week, all of the A and S tier specs will be clearing at least 11s. I think people are kind of holding off on going into plus 12s right now, but we leave that for another time. But Assassination has received some major buffs and tuning throughout the beta, and it's not really a surprise that it's doing so well in Mythic Plus. It's actually a happy change of pace to see it do this high and be this, you know, overall rated, ranked in the meters, as opposed to other melee specs, because it's been pretty much the bottom melee spec for years in M+. It, together with maybe survival, but we'll get to that in a second, because first of all, we need to take a look at Outlaw, which is also in A tier. Rogues are eating kind of good this time around, and it's a smidgerino lower than than Assassination as it stands right now because it's just not doing as high. Now, Outlaw has a bunch of bugs. I'm actually looking at some of the data here that I have, and I don't know how much those bugs actually affected because Outlaw is still doing quite a bit of damage, so that's not necessarily a problem, and it's probably tankier than Assassination because Outlaw, let's be honest, Outlaw has been overperforming in M+ as the desired rogue spec, let's say, for the majority of the M+ lifespan, and it's doing quite a bit of 10s at the moment, and it's itching its way into 11s as well, but it is decently behind Assassination. If we're gonna be looking at Raider.io score, I think the top Outlaw right now is like 100 score below Assassination, so if there's any metric that we can use to kind of differentiate these specs, it probably is score. Now we're gonna be moving on to survival, and like I mentioned, actually it's not doing that bad. It's actually just below Outlaw as of this moment. Survival actually has been doing pretty well, and it's likely going to do even better on 11.05 once it's gonna get that juicy buff that it's having, you know, that's coming right to it. Survival is just, you know, your average hunter spec. Obviously being melee gives it some advantage, I think, when it comes to the Mythic Plus season this time around, and I think melees are a little bit advantaged in the sense that you need so many kicks and interrupt, and usually melees do it way better than range because obviously you have a shorter kick. I don't know how much of a leg up this gives Survival over the BMs and the MMs because they're doing pretty well as well. I think MM is probably performing a little bit better than Survival, but this is not the range tier list this week, that's next week. But it's pretty good to see Survival still this high up because at the beginning of the season, probably most specs are going to be performing well, but as we progress through the season, we're likely going to see these being spread apart a little bit more as each spec kind of reaches its cap in terms of overall performance. But right now, if you're playing Survival, you're pretty well set up. Moving to Enhancement, oh boy. I was hesitant in putting Enhancement into S tier. It is significantly ahead most of the A tier specs, but it's still not S tier, and we'll get to that in a second. Enhancement is actually doing really well and is getting a bunch of tuning and changes, and I'm actually curious to see how it lands once the anniversary patch hits, which is going to be in about a month and a half, 2 months maybe, somewhere along those lines. But until then, Enhancement is doing really well. I still feel like it might be a little bit squishier than most DPS specs, even though it has received some much needed defensive boosts when it comes to the rework that it's gotten into the War Within, with the Stone Bulwark Totem, with the, I don't know if people use this, but the, is it Primordial something talent that gives you about, what, 6% damage reduction once you have your Elemental out, which, you know, that's for Earth Elemental, making Earth Elemental an actually legit defensive cooldown where you not only get the 10% extra HP, but also 6% damage reduction. That's actually pretty good, on top of, you know, the Ancestral Visage, whatever. The only defensive that you actually have, to be fair. But outside of that, probably in 11 keys, Enhancement is just crushing it, and that is amazing to see. Feral, Feral, rejoice, you are in B tier, you are ahead of Arms. Feral was very close into getting into A tier in our tier list, the way we rank him, of course. It might be in A tier in other specs, or maybe in C tier for others as well, because right now Feral is just doing stuff. Feral is clearing keys, so where else are we gonna put it? Some of the top Ferals are actually doing pretty well when it comes to actually getting that IO score, since that is a metric that we use to rank these. But the reason why Feral didn't actually get into A tier is because if you look at the breakdown of the top Ferals in the world right now, you will see that the entire spec is being carried by like one dude or dudette, Megusar, who's actually about 200 score above everybody else, well, like 120 right now, but it is reaching the 2.4k rating, and that's only one Feral. That means that, sure, the spec is capable of clearing content to that level, but the fact that it's like only one person doing that at the moment kind of doesn't really give me the confidence in putting Feral into A tier. It has the potential, so hopefully more of you nerds push higher keys to get Feral into that deserved A tier spot, but probably I still feel like B tier is probably where it belongs. And now, to the much-awaited Frost Death Knights. The king of this season is the only S tier spec. Spoiler alert for the rest of the video. Haha, because 80% of you just clicked at the end of the video anyway to see the final ranking. But Frost Death Knight is actually the highest performing melee as of today. Overall, and not just like this one dude that just has the 2.6k score. I think closing in on the range players that are clearing the highest keys, this dude might actually be in the top team that's clearing the highest keys as of recording this video, as the research that we're doing, which, you know, says a little bit. I mean, Frost DK is under the big spotlight of probably receiving more and more nerfs. I mean, I don't really hope so. That's not why I'm saying all of this, but it is overperforming most of the melees right now, and I think it deserves its lone king spot in being the only melee in S tier. It's doing really, really well, and to be fair, are we really bothered by that? Frost DK kind of needs it, right, guys? Because I think Frost DK was like the other melee back in the last couple of expansions, where it's at the bottom of the list with Assassination, or very close to it. Fury Warrior, oh boy, Fury Warrior is actually Fury Warrior is actually the hope that Warrior has of being a good class, and Fury Warrior does not disappoint. It's actually doing really well. It has been, I think, probably nerfed a little bit, but it is getting some tuning, because Fury Warrior is actually doing pretty high burst damage. But I think what we're seeing right here, after the nerfs, I think they went live already, we don't see Fury Warrior being an S tier spec, despite that it was probably nerfed more than Frost DK, maybe? I'm just saying, I don't remember all the tuning, but it felt like Fury Warrior was nerfed more than Frost DK, and it's hilarious because it's still not reaching the levels of Frost DK, but that just goes to show where the damage in the logs comes from when it's talking about Fury Warrior, because it has a lot of burst and upfront damage, which makes it look very good in low-level keys, low-level dungeons, and let's say low-level AoE raids, where probably some of those nerfs come from, because Fury just explodes anything that doesn't live long enough way faster than most other specs in the game, and makes it look way better than it might actually is. Don't get me wrong, it's still A tier, still duking it out with some of the best melee DPS specs out there. Spoiler alert, is it the 4th best melee DPS spec in our tier list? Maybe it is. Havoc has surprised people for actually being quite decent in M+, right there next to Fury, actually, and definitely surprised me, because in raids doesn't really look like it's doing that hot. But Havoc has kind of always done better in M+ than raids, much to Havoc Raiders' dismay. And it's looking like that's going to continue this time around, considering that Havoc is maybe one of the only or very few melee DPS specs that have uncapped AoE with Felscard, which has been doing really well on beta, and it's still doing really well on live right now. If the tanks and the healers can end up surviving those big 3-4 pack pulls, you probably will still see Havoc destroying the meters, because uncapped AoE is very fun, and I would be surprised how long this lasts, because the beta testing of the keys kind of showed that you might not be able to pull that big once you go higher than +11. So we'll see how Havoc evolves in the next couple of months. Red Paladin has taken a slight dip in performance in relation to the other melee DPS specs. It's not bad. It is above Outlaw and below Havoc, but you'll see by the end on how Red actually looks. It's still a very good DPS spec. It's doing surprisingly good in raids for some reason. I don't know how that will still translate into M+ once we, you know, get more logs in, more data in. Red has always been a very solid spec ever since its rework in Dragonflight, and it's continuing to be very solid. Seeing as how Holy Paladin is getting nerfed and nobody's going to push keys with Prop Paladin except yours truly and 3 other people that play Prop Paladin for some reason, because we lack pain, which makes Red the probably most definitely the most pick Paladin spec in M+, being the de facto bringer of the Paladin utility, which is very good. Bops, freedoms, especially for that last Arakara boss. Dude, having a Paladin on that last Arakara boss, holy shit, you will kiss your Paladin's feet. They're not Zaltath feet, but they're so good that they can stun your ad, blind your ad, freedom you out of your root, and you don't give a fuck about that mechanic. Paladin is so good, underappreciated, underrated, but as of this tier list, that's where it's going to stay. Now, Subtlety Rogue is a tricky one, because the way we see it, and, you know, we might be wrong, but the way we see it, it's the only C tier spec at the moment in terms of the, you know, overall raw M+ performance it's doing right now. Now, the way Warcraft logs see it, and that's probably based a lot on its popularity. And you can see this Warcraft logs screenshot that we have right now. Subtlety is actually showing on top. Now, this essentially just goes to show like some of these rankings are not entirely what you want to see or what you might want to find out or what the information is, because it's not, you know, indicative of Subtlety's performance, considering that if you just take the raw keys that Subtlety is doing right now, they're not holding up to the other specs right now. And I think Subtlety is clearing about, there's like one Subtlety that cleared like 1+10 as of recording this video, probably more by the time you watch it, but Subtlety is just doing like fuck all in keys. Well, I say fuck all, like they're still doing top of the top 10 subtleties are still above 2k, so that's still quite impressive for the first 3 days of M+. But I don't know how it will scale going forward to the season. It's not like I don't want to see subtlety actually destroy. It's one of my favorite rogue specs, one of my favorite melee specs of all time. But unfortunately, that is where it is right now. And maybe that has to do with the hero talents being a little bit finicky for rogue, at least insofar as I've been able to test them out to have a personal feel about them. But we'll see how that turns out in the end. And of course, we have to talk about Unholy DK, and it's another good example spec to use to talk about logs, rankings, and performance, because Unholy DK is probably one of the specs. I think also Dorky said this in his tier list, which he did, of course, but that's also been our experience as well. The best AoE spec in the game, because it has still probably uncapped AoE. I don't think Epidemic is capped at all. And whenever we played it in M+, it freaking destroyed. Now, the higher in keys we went, the harder it was for Unholy to actually shine, because the fewer packs you can end up pulling, and in low keys Unholy just doesn't have time to do all of its damage, as we've seen with Marcelian as well when he places Unholy, if the mobs don't live long enough. I mean, that's true for a lot of specs, to be fair, but Unholy is a tricky little pony, because you have to meet a lot of criteria, but if you do, Unholy could easily trump Frost Death Knight, maybe. I mean, maybe that's just my copium. But as it stands right now, Unholy is just good. It's solid, it's B tier. A lot of the specs are solid, as you can see. Like, there are no real specs in D tier, and there's like only one C tier, because Windwalker is going all the way into A tier, in between Havoc and, I said in between Havoc and Ret. Which was not my experience when I've tested the Windwalker, but it has received buffs ever since. It's surprisingly doing really well, and it might actually scale higher and higher the more you push these keys, since AoE for Windwalker doesn't scale really well with high numbers of packs. I mean, we've seen that in Dragonflight. Whenever we could pull like a giga amount of mobs, Windwalker was just pretty low in the overall rankings. But, you know, when it comes to those heavy Fist of Fury builds, some Dance of GG procs, depending on what builds people end up playing in the end in the Windwalker, you actually destroy. But the damage doesn't really scale that well with other specs, which is surprising to see it this high up. I mean, I didn't expect it, and hey, listen, all the power to you, Windwalkers. Please do more damage and be S tier, because I don't think we've seen Windwalker S tier since Shadowlands, maybe? But that was a long time ago, and we've evolved ever since then. And you should evolve too with better add-ons that you can use in your gameplay, and we have an add-ons video that we use to push our keys and do raids and all of the other stuff, but particularly keys. And you can see our list of add-ons here that we recommend you start your Season 1 journey, the War Within expansion, of course, with this list in particular. Check it out.